Good morning. I am very excited to be here and very excited to be part of this very interesting interdisciplinary opportunity to have some dialogue between psychologists and philosophers on this central topic to being human, to being here, to existing. So very excited to be here, and also really happy that I'm the first speaker because I can relax for the rest of the conference, and also it was an interesting. I offered several topics that I could talk about relevant to meaning, and this one was the one that that they asked me to talk about, and so I think it's a good way to sort of set the stage for the discussions to come, and I sort of felt a little bit of responsibility for representing how psychologists approach the topic of meaning. And it's really interesting because we talk about meaning in life, which Tyler just sort of referenced, what is the meaning of life, which is what philosophers tend to think about and talk about, and how do I find meaning in life, which is sort of the psychological perspective. I'm a psychologist, so I pretty much take the psychological perspective, and so I will sort of lay the groundwork for how we think about that. So I think that a lot of psychologists and a lot of people coming to think more deeply about meaning get started with Viktor Frankl. His work was very seminal in the field of psychology, even though he, just like Freud, was not a psychologist but a psychiatrist. But we like to claim him for our own anyway, because he thought very deeply and psychologically about issues of meaning. He talked about will to meaning. He was a Holocaust camp survivor and lost a tremendous amount, suffered a tremendous amount, but survived and found meaning in that suffering. And he said, what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for some goal worthy of him. What he needs is not the discharge of tension at any cost, but the call of a potential meaning waiting to be fulfilled. And this issue of striving to find meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man, and I think he meant in women too. And that is the will to meaning. So what he was saying is this, kind of in contrast to a lot of, at the time, in the 50s, the Freudian perspective on what humans are all about, these basic drives for sex and death and dominance. And he's saying, no, it's really about finding meaning. And it was it was sort of the beginning of humanistic psychology really taking off, that this striving to find meaning, this will to meaning. And he said, in terms of sources of meaning, the topic that I'm trying to get to, we can discover this meaning in life in three different ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, by experiencing something or encountering someone, which is relationships, and by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. So, his perspective was, even when everything else is taken away from you, you can control your attitude. You at least have a choice in terms of how to approach suffering and death. Obviously from his experiences in the concentration camp. So it's great. It's great language. It's inspiring. It's so profound. And there is a quote that he has: "The meaning of life is to give life meaning," which maybe gets to some of our philosophy. Elie Wiesel is also a Holocaust camp survivor. And he said, our obligation is to give meaning to life, and in doing so, to overcome the passive, indifferent life. And another nice meaning quote is, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And if you start browsing on the internet, you find a lot of these sort of inspirational quotes and this very poetic, beautiful language that really speaks to our spirit. The problem as a psychologist is we can't study that. Right? To do empirical research on this kind of poetry is pretty near impossible. So what psychologists tend to do is we try to take these big ideas, constructs like love or peace or meaning, and bring it down to a level where we can operationalize it, where we can define it in a way that we can measure it and that other people, our peers, would agree that indeed we are measuring it accurately. So that's really the translation that psychologists make from the big picture stuff to bringing it down to the scale where we can conduct empirical research. The leader, probably one of the most famous psychologists currently alive, is Marty Seligman, and Marty has talked about meaning too. And he, in fact, in his model of well-being, he has this model called the PERMA model, which is positive relationships is the R, the engagement, the P is positive emotion. So he has meaning, and the A is achievement. So the meaning is part of his PERMA model, right? So he's emphasizing the important role of meaning in human flourishing well-being. He said, human beings ineluctably want meaning and purpose in life. The meaningful life consists in belonging to and serving something that you believe is bigger than the self, and humanity creates all the positive institutions to allow this. Religion, political party, being green, the Boy Scouts, or the family. I don't know why I picked those particular things, but he's trying to talk about sources of meaning, and again, getting to that issue. He said the good life consists in deriving happiness by using your signature strengths every day in the main realms of living. The meaningful life adds on one more component, using these same strengths to forward knowledge, power, or goodness. A life that does this is pregnant with meaning, and if God comes at the end, such a life is sacred. So again, I was sort of hoping with Seligman, because he is a psychologist, that he would have a bit more empirical guidance in terms of how we approach sources. But he really, again, this is like 30,000-foot language, and psychologists need something that we can actually quantify. So you're getting the idea, but it's really a very challenging thing to figure out how to look at meaning in an empirical way. So I've spent a long time, I was talking with Jeff earlier this morning, thinking about meaning. I was fascinated with this idea. I mean, I was an existentialist when I was a little kid, so I didn't even know the word, but I was very interested in these issues of, being alone, how do you connect with other people, death, responsibility, like the big picture questions. And so when I got to graduate school and had the opportunity to start thinking about meaning, it's a hard thing to sell your advisor on, but I was able to do that. And so I have spent many years studying and trying to conceptualize meaning. And I think my contribution to the area is much more in the realm of just trying to conceptualize and figure out and make sense of the literature. And I really appreciated Tyler's comment about integrating information, because we're proliferating in terms of empirical research and people's ideas, and it's just growing and growing and growing, but we don't have ways to consolidate it and see what we really do know. And a lot of people talk about the same things using different language, and use the same language to talk about different things. And reading the meaning literature, it was very, very difficult to sort of trudge through that and try to come up with a conceptual framework, which is what I did. And in this framework, one of the things I did is I tried to differentiate global meaning, which is, I think, the topic that we're talking about here in this conference, and situational meaning, which is something as a clinical psychologist I'm very interested in and concerned about how people make meaning out of very difficult experiences, like trauma, like assault, like cancer diagnosis, bereavement. Those are the kinds of things where I call those situational meaning. So for purposes today, sticking with the global meaning part is where I'm going to stay. I could give a whole different talk on the situational meaning, so but I'm not going to do that today. So meaning in life, as psychologists operationalize it, is often defined as a subjective judgment. We ask participants things like, answer this question. My life is full of meaning. Not at all, to a great deal. And that's really what a lot of the research on meaning in life has focused on, is just this very basic kind of, we don't tell the subjects what meaning is, we let them define it, and they answer these questions. So as Tyler had actually indicated a bit ago, we aren't sure if this is a unitary phenomenon, like it's just one thing, or whether there are different aspects of it. And so a student of mine, Logan George, who is now Dr. George, but at the time he was my graduate student, and we looked at whether meaning is unidimensional or has three different dimensions, the tripartite model. And a lot of people have talked about meaning as consisting of three different components. So this sense of comprehension, this sense of purpose, and this sense of mattering or transcendence. And we developed a questionnaire that I think kind of explains what we mean by that. So comprehension, the items, sample items, I can make sense of the things that happen in my life. I know what my life is about. You know, the world's coherent, that things make sense, things fit together. The sense of purpose, I have aims in life worth striving for, overarching goals that guide me in life, that sense that your life has some ultimate purpose that you're working towards. And then this issue of mattering, which is something that the traditional scales haven't really picked up on that well, and I know Frank and Mike have been also trying to work on a measure of this sense of it matters that I'm here. It matters even after I'm gone that I was here. I did something. So what we know in terms of using these kinds of subjective judgment measures is that meaning in life is associated with well-being. You know, this is a long laundry list, but mental health, depression, life satisfaction, suicidality, happiness, physical health, illness, all kinds of illnesses, health-related quality of life, and even mortality and longevity are related to meaning in life. And even in studies where they control for lots of other factors, this kind of comes out. And I was thinking this morning, I'm really not even aware of any studies that have not found this or have found that meaning in life is bad. I mean, it's a good thing. It tends to be associated with good stuff. So the subjective judgment, though, is only part of kind of where I'm trying to get to with this talk today, because that's only a small part of understanding meaning in life. That's how we measure it, that's what it is. But where does it come from? That's a different question, right? So, so when we're thinking about meaning in life and how people end up feeling that way, it really is how they are living and the global meaning orienting system that they have, the content and the functioning of their meaning system, which I call global meaning. And that is where I kind of think a lot of the sources of meaning are derived. So global meaning has three parts. There is the beliefs that people have. So each of us is unique in our constellation of the beliefs that we have. We have a set of goals, and our goals tend to be organized hierarchically so that we have these big overarching goals, like to live a good life, or to be a good person, to be a good parent, to make a difference in the world. And then those goals are organized by more specific sub-goals, like how do you have a good life? Well, get an education. Then we have smaller goals, like how do you get an education? Go to college. How do you go to college? Well, you take classes. And how do you go to, you get out of bed in the morning. So your goals are from the really big ones down to the everyday ones. And and then the third part is this subjective sense of meaning. So in terms of the global beliefs, there's not a really good taxonomy that psychologists have developed yet for what our universal beliefs are, but we do know that human beings have differ a lot on their identity, who they are. We have a sense of who is me and who is not me, and all sorts of identities within that in terms of race and gender, ethnicity, culture, occupation, et cetera, et cetera. Fairness and justice. We have beliefs about how fair the world is, how just the world is. We have beliefs about our sense of control over what happens to us, how predictable the world is, how coherent the world is, how benevolent the world is, how benevolent other people are. And then the metaphysical or divine, so people vary in terms of beliefs in God or beliefs in an afterlife or beliefs in transcendence. We also vary and are unique in our constellation of goals. So goals are what we hold most important in life, what we work toward being, achieving, or maintaining. And the maintaining part's super important, especially when we talk about the situational meaning or trauma, because a lot of our goals are things we already have. So we have relationships that we cherish, we have our health, and you may not think of that as a goal, but if it is taken away from you, you realize really quickly how important that was for you to maintain. So a number of goal or psychologists who study goals talk about goal maintenance as also really important to people. And then the values are the guidelines that people use to pursue their goals. So I haven't done a lot of work personally on sources of meaning, but a number of psychologists have, and I think Tashiana Schnell is probably the best in terms of, she's really studied a lot people's self-reports of what provides meaning in their lives, and she's organized it into 5 categories, and I'll just show you some examples from each of her 5 categories, because according to people's self-reports, these are the things that make life feel meaningful. So she talks about horizontal self-transcendence, and that means kind of being connected to something outside yourself that's of this world. So commitment to public welfare and human rights, active engagement in social justice, feeling connected with nature, or doing or creating things of lasting value to leave a legacy. So those are all ways that people say they find life to be more meaningful by connecting with other things. There's vertical self-transcendence too, and this is the more traditional religious or spiritual, immaterial, supernatural reality, faith, prayer, religion, spirituality more broadly defined, personal relation to the sacred, and reality beyond this known. So that transcendence to a lot of people is where they say they find their meaning, either being connected this way or this way. There's also self-actualization, so a lot of the motives and sources that people describe she has listed as self-actualization, and this factor is a commitment to employment, challenge, and promotion of one's capacities. So a search for novelty, change and risk, individualism, emphasizing one's uniqueness, and power, achievement, knowledge, and creativity. Those are all self-actualization. It's sort of who are you and how can you be the best you that you can be kind of philosophy. There's well-being and relatedness, so a commitment to enjoyment, sensitivity and warmth, and privacy and company. Community, which is care for company and closeness. Romantic love and intimacy, comfort and enjoyment, so pursuing pleasures. Those are things that people say provide meaning in their life. And the last one that she talks about is order, which is commitment to principles, tradition, customs, and conventions, practicality, and morality, oriented by a set of definite guidelines and standards. So again, people say that these are the sources of meaning in their life. So in addition to that content, it's also the functioning of a person's global meaning that provides a sense of meaning in life. And what I mean by that is that this functioning of the meaning system provides that sense of meaning in life. When we have consistency between our beliefs and encounters with the world, we feel that life is meaningful. And Sarah and some of the other psychologists who've studied meaning will do things that sort of try to in an experimental situation just nudge or violate a little bit someone's expectations, and they find that that reduces a sense of meaning when things don't happen the way that they expected them to happen. Maintaining our current goals, as I mentioned, when you have goals, when you have things that are really important to you and they are threatened or lost, like bereavement or like some kind of health situation where you get a serious diagnosis, it can be very hard to maintain a sense that life is meaningful. Making progress towards future goals, that's, again, one of the things that humans do, and probably lots of other animals too, is compare, here's our goal, here's where I am, here's where I want to be, what's the rate of progress that I'm making towards my goal, am I getting there, am I happy with that progress? So making steady progress is important in providing meaning. And then consistency between goals, values, and behavior. So right now, there's a lot of interest, for example, in moral injury. The military is very interested in that, and it occurs in other contexts too, where people behave in ways that they feel are inconsistent with their own moral codes. And it's not the same as PTSD, but it's incredibly damaging to people when they feel that they have transgressed their own moral codes. So when that's, again, a threat to feeling that my life is meaningful, that I'm on track. So what about the research on those correlates of meaning in life? So not the self-reports, but when you give people a meaning in life questionnaire and you give them some other questionnaires, that's how psychologists tend to do a lot of our research, we find socioeconomic status. People higher in socioeconomic status report more meaning in life. Some of the personality, if you're a personality psychologist, there's a 5-factor model. Extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness are all related to feeling more meaning in life, but not neuroticism or openness. People who have an optimistic outlook are report more meaning in life. People who are higher in religious beliefs, higher in religious behaviors and commitments also report more meaning in life. In fact, this is probably the strongest linkage of any of these variables. I mean, I haven't done a meta-analysis and compared effect sizes, but I think that this is just such a consistent finding that higher religiousness is related to more reports of meaning. Self-esteem, the more meaning you have, the more self-esteem you have, which drives which. Research really hasn't answered that question. Feeling connected to others, relationships, the better people's relationships are, the more they socialize with other people. If they have kids and are invested in their parenting, those are related to having more meaning in life. This one was kind of interesting. There's a recent paper that showed that following routines makes people feel more meaning in life. So when you are kind of doing your normal routine, that's all good. And when that gets disrupted, you experience a hit to your sense of meaning in life, which is sort of maybe counter to what you'd think, but we kind of are creatures of habit. Time orientation, so this is more of an experimental thing when psychologists ask people to reflect back on their past or ask them to project into the future. So playing around with time orientations makes people feel more meaning in life. Having affirming experiences, so again, if you have stimuli that are kind of consistent with what you were expecting, that gives you more of a boost to your sense of meaning in life. And also expressing gratitude. I mean, gratitude is really a complicated phenomenon because you really have to use counterfactuals when you're grateful to think about what could have been and what is, and how much better what is than what could have been. And that is a process when you ask people to be grateful. I mean, sort of naturally occurring gratitude, but also if you ask people to reflect on what they're grateful for, they experience a boost in their meaning. So we have lots to learn about meaning in life. One of the questions we have is whether different sources might map onto different types of meaning. So I mentioned those 3 types of meaning earlier, and what we did is we looked at whether different things map onto those 3 qualities, and we saw that dogmatism and self-concept clarity, the more you are clear on who you are, your identity, was closely related to the sense of comprehension aspect of a sense of meaning. A willingness to sacrifice, and this measure was like for your country. Would you die to protect your important values or your country? So the willingness to sacrifice was related highest to purpose, and then spirituality, interestingly, was related to the sense of mattering. And this kind of work is really in its beginning stages, because people haven't really picked apart the different aspects of meaning, but I think it's really important. And I just saw a recent study that that modified our measure and did some EMA studies where they were just sort of asking people throughout the day about their experiences and these three kinds of meaning and how those were related to well-being. And I don't know if you could guess which one of those three kind of came out as, anybody want to guess? It's the mattering piece is the part that was really coming out. The part that we really haven't measured or attended to, but that sense of mattering was the one that seemed to be driving people's well-being. So, so these sources of meaning are really important to try to understand. It's interesting to think about what people think about is the sources of meaning in their life, but also empirically studying what's associated with those boosts in meaning in life. And sometimes often people aren't really the best reporters of their own behavior and don't really know those linkages. So, so as we develop better measures and use some more innovative methodologies, I think we're going to be able to answer a lot more sophisticated questions about meaning in life. So that's it. Thank you.